Coming up in today's episode of Critical Careers.
One thing that we must not forget here is courage.
Yeah.
Really being courageous in this industry is the most important thing. This has been a beautiful story. This was years ago that I've read in the newspapers. A woman developed skyscraper from the time of conception through the real estate transaction, to the financing, through the operations, through the facility management.
Because if it's been done once, it can be done again. This episode of the Critical Careers podcast is sponsored by CBRE, AVK, Evershed Sutherland, JLL, and Mace Construct. Hi, I'm Joyce Wady. Welcome to the Critical Careers podcast. On today's show, I welcome Blanka Thibault, founder of TechHer Capital. With AI driving so much of the conversation about data center investment, one of the areas that's still really underrepresented for women is the investment side. Blanka and I take a look at why that is and what needs to change for the future. Hope you enjoy the show. So Blanka, thank you so much for joining us today. It's so great to have you here with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we had a conversation a little while ago, and it was really interesting because there's so many headlines that have been, in the news over the last couple of years about data center investment and AI and how that is driving, such a huge demand for the build and the construction and everything. I've had conversations with other women for both the book and the podcast, and it was really on how women have made such great progress on so many different facets of the industry. Engineering is maybe not quite so much, but the one big gap is in the boardroom and on the investment side. And so I think your story to me was just so interesting just because you're doing something very different and you're kind of breaking ground a little bit. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what it is that you are doing today?
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me, first of all. I've been in the real estate field for the past 10 years or so. So that's where I started my traditional kind of real estate and finance career. And that led me to the data center industry, which we will go into later on, which led me to co-found a company, which led me to today founding my own company. And here what I'm doing is I'm actually taking my advisory expertise and translating into intelligence for investors. I'm working with infrastructure investors, real estate investors, and other sort of traditional investors that want to tap into the data center market, or they already have experience in the data center market, and connecting them to the right pipeline, to the right opportunity, to the right operator.
Sure.
Custom made for specifically really with the technical expertise and a right structuring for both sides, on the data center operator and the investment side.
Who controls the capital in many ways kind of controls the power on what gets built and where it gets built and with whom it gets built. So how have you seen that shift, or how have you experienced that, through the different roles that you've played and kind of what you're doing today?
My experience comes from lately and from the logistics market, where I saw this shift where the whole logistics market was sort of going down the tail end of COVID. And in that time, data center investment was going really heavily on, capital deployment. And I luckily joined the team, and I started seeing this massive shift whereby we were no longer talking about tenants and triple net leases, etc., but rather than massive amount of capital and taking this real accountability. And the growth was just so exponential year over year that the question was no longer, do we have the funds to build these needed capacity, but rather you must spend it. We have massive capacity needs and we need to go.
Yeah.
So the responsibility and the accountability became monumental for me.
Was there anything about data centers as an asset class that you saw like in making that shift, or was it just customer demand and the technology advancement and that kind of stuff, or was there something specific to data centers as an asset that kind of changed that?
Data centers traditionally were called an infrastructure investment, and all of a sudden there was this boom of real estate investor thinking, oh, it might be a real estate investment and let's get into it. Then quickly, it took probably like a couple years, 2-3 years to realize it's not as simple as they might think. And now all these new investors are coming into this shift, coming into this wave, understanding it's an infrastructure, and there's massive issues on the grid, on the capacities of the racks, on the constant changes in the chips that we are hearing constantly from NVIDIA coming up with new densities, costs, procurement problems, community issues. So there's all these different issues coming along in the time of building up a data center versus the traditional real estate. Let's not even talk about the cost of the utility once we start operating it. So one of my favorite quotes was that in a data center, real estate is only 5% of the problem. So,
and and it's interesting because historically it was probably the majority of the question that had to be answered. Of it needed to be location, it needed to be near where the data was being generated, and and that has completely changed.
Absolutely, and there is a lot of speculation as well around the market, and a lot of speculative sort of investors, because they are seeing this boom and they call themselves, experts in the field and opening their own company, trying to raise funds and going with that traditional route of, I know how it works, I can raise funds, I can bring the grid, I can bring the community, I can bring the relevant stakeholders, etc. But it's not as straightforward as it might seem. So it's a very, very capital intensive, very expensive investment, very heavy on the different infrastructural kind of rigors that involves, and the constant changes. And ultimately, if we think about it, we are only talking about maximum 10 ultimate tenants that will rent spaces.
People don't necessarily think about that aspect, and especially for the general public who is starting to get an impression of data centers and the industry, and it's not necessarily a positive one. They really don't understand the nuances of who it's being sold to, how it's being used, and all of that, which adds a whole different layer of complexity to it.
Absolutely. And there is this massive secrecy around it as well. So we have to think of that competition, right? The heavy capital investment, the different sort of competing for AI, competing for now the procurement for GPUs, for chips, etc. So it's a lot of aspects that are not being communicated the right way to the community. I think that from the environmental perspective, the data center industry has been doing a much better job lately to communicate to the community the fears that they are having. How much noise will I experience in my neighborhood? There's still regulations of how far a data center be from the nearest residential area. Will it cause traffic? No, it will not cause traffic.
No.
Will it cause employment? Yes, it will have more and more employment as you traditionally think. So there is a lot of positives around it, and generally speaking, I'm a fan of a data center as a good neighbor.
And it's interesting because I've had conversations with like architects, and the way we think about and where we locate a data center, it really is going to start to change. And I think that's going to be a really interesting kind of next wave of development. It's just a matter of now starting to think outside the box versus, that typical warehouse idea, not to mention things like heat reuse and other ways that it can give back to the community and stuff as well, too.
The way traditionally we think when we think about heat reuse is we are going to build a data center next to the district heat system. If you're lucky, yes, you will build it there. But more and more as data centers are expanding into exurban, sort of remote areas, we are seeing more industries sort of willing to co-locate because it's kind of offsetting their capital costs and investments. So data centers are actually facilitating these smaller industries to come in, talking about the fishing industry, perhaps like a vertical greenhouse industry. So there's some smaller industries that are willing to co-locate and bring some positive factors to the neighborhood and to the data center usage itself.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of your transition from Amazon into the investment side. What did that look like for you? What did you notice about the change of conversation that you were having from being on the client side to being, inside the investment room?
Since I was a little girl, I was always very interested in math, which sort of, as I studied, it went into finance. So I studied finance really heavily. I studied economics and real estate. And when I started working in real estate, that was a lot of heavy loan asset management, underwriting, etc. So I was really interested in the mathematical part of it. When I started working at Amazon, I was not only part of the transaction team, but also the investment strategies team that wrote the actual investment piece and brought forward to the S-suite, as they call it, at Amazon. So that was a really interesting involvement because I was able to kind of shift the narrative and take a huge accountability of hundreds of millions of euros being deployed. Here I am, transacting on a deal, but also presenting it and really calling it out why it's so important. When I joined Sepia in in 2024 as a co-founder, that actually even sort of upgraded my experience in a way that I was no longer just using a traditional kind of hyperscaler process to present a case, but now I was really responsible to present vis-a-vis the investors of, yes, this is what we're working on, and this is why you should really invest into it. This is why it's an exciting opportunity. And so this brought me exactly into the rooms with investors.
Yeah.
And, investors today, they have two things on mind, not just the technical capabilities. Like when they look at the deal, it's not just about the technical capabilities, but also the reputation of the team.
It takes it out of the abstract in some ways. It almost feels like it's a very rational. It's, you kind of looking at what the megawatts are, whatever the criteria is. It's a very black and white, almost kind of
mathematical.
Exactly. It's a very mathematical decision that gets made. And then all of a sudden now you're taking it and you're seeing decisions being made on a personal level and the trust in the team and the people that are involved. It feels like there's a great opportunity for change there.
I've been really advocating for, more women participation in this field, and hence the name of my company as well. It has a little nuance to it. If there is on a co-founding team a woman, they call it a women-founded company.
Just one woman?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Out of 5, one woman,
Yeah.
they call it, they tick the box and they say it's a women-founded company.
Yeah.
I want to see it a little bit more upgraded,
Sure.
kind of like having a more stringent scoring for what's considered a women-owned company.
Yeah.
And women-owned data center investment infrastructure company.
How far away do you think we are from that happening?
We see the CEO of Equinix, Noel Walsh at Microsoft. So we have good examples of women really at the high at the corporate ladder. There's always a question of why women step out of, like, is that the industry that pushes us out?
Right.
Or we sort of stop at a certain point. I do my part on my kind of smaller scale.
Sure.
On my grassroots initiative as much as I can, because I find the industry so exciting and women have it way harder to work their way up in a corporate ladder, especially in this field. In this field, it's still quite male dominated, which is, traditionally it has been this way. One of the things that I always encourage younger women is to get involved, even on a grassroots level.
Yeah.
There are more and more associations that are part of it, namely Critical Careers.
Right. Because it just makes you feel like you have a community within the industry. I'm starting to realize more and more that has a huge payoff.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So when we were speaking before, you had mentioned that on the investment side, that can be a rather closed system. What does that look like in reality?
In reality is that it's a network that has been built for decades and it tends to replicate itself. The consequence of it is if you don't get into it. It's not because of your capabilities. It's just because you don't have the right doors open.
Yeah.
I'm really, really strong in building my kind of basics
in
order to come through those doors, the decision-making doors.
So you had mentioned to me that there was a project in Toronto where it was a completely woman-led team. What was that experience like for you, kind of witnessing that?
This has been a beautiful story. This was years ago that I've read in the newspapers in Toronto.
Yeah.
A women-developed skyscraper from the time of conception through the real estate transaction, to the financing, through the operations, through the facility management. Of course, there were males involved on the side, but in terms of the heads of each of the kind of project team were led by women. And I've been sort of trying to push that narrative behind closed doors, and possibly there is not enough of us on there, or we just haven't brought the team together yet on this front. But if we can work towards that, and if I can be sort of the catalyst for that, where, I bring together well and capable group of women who can build a data center from A to Z and manage it, and from the conception to the management, I think that would be sort of my contribution to my career and, to the future generation and normalize it.
Because if it's been done once, it can be done again. And I think that's the thing that stood out to me when you were telling me that before, was just, it gave you hope. It gave you an idea of what the path could look like.
Absolutely.
And now you're trying to put that into practice here too.
It's taking a lot of risks also on our end, because it might be a corporate position. Will your jobs support that sort
Yeah.
of move just because of the fact that you're a woman and you want to create maybe a side project, or you're willing to step out of your position to build that. I don't know yet how it will look structurally, but it's something that I aim to do, and if anyone is interested, reach out and let's start working on this.
So how has all of this then influenced you for creating Tech Her Capital? What was the trigger to kind of bring you to make this move and take this step?
When I stepped back from CPR, I sat down with myself, with my thoughts, and I thought about this concept that I've known for years, and it's called Ikigai,
Yeah.
whereby you have questions to ask yourself. What do you like? What are you passionate about? What does the world need? And what can make money? I'm really good at networking.
Yeah.
I love it. It's so natural to me, managing complex problems. And I love the data center field. Brought all those things together, and I came up with a name, Tech Her Capital. When I announced my company, it sort of naturally came to me. It's almost like a magnet. This has been a really fantastic experience because I have people coming to me on the both ends.
Yeah.
And looking for those sort of connections. But my aim is to promote more women in this industry.
Sometimes those traditional doors are either really tough to get through, or just are just closed to women or to other minorities, or to people that don't have the same traditional backgrounds. So what can women think about? What should they be looking at if they're finding themselves kind of bumping into some of those ceilings?
The way I would start is obviously follow the market. What is happening? Is there, possibilities to invest? How you can invest? Can you pair up in a startup, potentially build a smaller infrastructure team?
Right.
That's another aspect. I'm looking into that as well.
That's the outside of the box kind of thinking that, is going to enable people to start to think about what becomes the first female-led project, from start to finish. Like when you're willing to kind of approach a problem from a different direction, it opens up a lot of possibilities. We bring such a different perspective to the projects that we work on. And it's just an alternate way of looking at the same problem. One is not necessarily better than the other, but when we only look at it from one way, we're missing a lot of opportunity. And I feel like this is kind of falls into that same category. You're thinking about it from a different way. You're approaching it from a different way. You're trying to build, use that networking capability that you enjoy to make the right connections between people to help, these projects get the funding that they need and everything. So it's just really starting to think about it in a very different light. And from my perspective, I think that's just a good thing. So.
Absolutely. I think one thing that we must not forget here is courage.
Yeah.
Really being courageous in this industry is the most important thing, because it's a tough industry.
Yeah.
It's a expensive industry. It's a competitive industry. So you really have to stand up and be courageous. And you may not have the answers for everything.
Yeah.
But I think courage, conviction, and grit is something that will lead you well in this industry.
Yeah. So where did you find the courage for yourself to stand up and do something different?
I come from a small Eastern European country, Serbia. I grew up in a very strong kind of strong family. And we were sort of leading the family. It was majority women. Two things I had for me all my life, and my parents can attest, is courage and curiosity. I was just the most curious person, and still to this day, I just never stopped learning and asking questions.
That is very much a characteristic in this industry, being curious, wanting to learn more, continuously learning in whatever shape that, whatever form that takes is definitely a big element of it for sure.
Yeah, curiosity you must, because it's just an industry that is changing by the minute. And what you knew yesterday, it's not valid today.
Right.
So you constantly have to keep up your knowledge, keep asking questions, connect with people.
Yeah.
And it's something that will sort of guide you in this industry.
If you're looking 10 years ahead, where would you like to see a Tech Her Capital be?
If we could make that front magazine and saying women-led data center built in Europe, and definitely bringing together a really, a group of strong women building
Yeah.
data center. I'd love that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's such an interesting conversation because you are looking at it from a different aspect of the industry, and one that is in desperate need of a female perspective. So I very much admire the fact that you are trying to do what you do. So
Thank you, Joyce, for the invitation. It's
Great.
been lovely. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Critical Careers. A special thank you to our founder, KO Data, and to our strategic partners, CBRE, AVK, Evershed Sutherland, JLL, and Mace Construct, for their support in making the Critical Careers Initiative possible.